Did I do it?
I don't know. Did you?
I don't know.
It's it sounds good, and your show is live. So
Amazing.
how's it going?
Hello. Um, Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first ever Star Wars Book Club live meeting on YouTube.
Woo!
Yeah. Woo.
Let me just announce to everyone that needs to be aware that we are live so we can get as many people in here as possible. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited that you guys are here.
Excited to be here.
I think if I look on YouTube, it's not quite caught up to. Oh no, it is. It is caught up. Okay, so is everybody in? My hosts, my co-hosts, are Chaco? I don't think you're in the Google Doc.
He never was. That's the secret. Let me join a live stream. Heyo. Don't forget to give the stream a like, guys.
Oh yeah, do the things. One question I have is how do I highlight comments?
Just click on them.
In
you-
Restream?
In the studio, if you click on the chat on the right, yeah.
Hey, look at that. Amazing. Okay. So let's get started. Thank you everyone for being here. This was an idea that I conceived about a month and a half ago to try and expand the audience of Star Wars books because so many of us are Star Wars fans and they don't even, like myself, didn't realize that there's a whole other world out there of Star Wars books and Star Wars comics. And there are so many amazing stories that, in my opinion, are sometimes even better than what we get on screen. And
100%.
yeah, so I thought, especially if you're doing the audiobooks, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, with Light of the Jedi. Billy, my partner, actually started reading Light of the Jedi audiobook kind of by surprise last week. I didn't even know he was planning to do it. And he got off the plane when we were getting home from LA Comic Con, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is the coolest thing that I've ever experienced." And so, yeah, Star Wars books are amazing. And I thought that this would be a really unique avenue to explore them. And I thought, what better book to start with than Light of the Jedi, because that was the second Star Wars book that I ever read right when it first debuted in early 2021. And who better to have on as my first guests and co hosts than the Dyad and the Force themselves, because you guys are the reason I started reading Star Wars books in the first place. So, welcome everybody,
Yes.
the Dyad. I'm sure most people in the chat know you guys, but if you just want to quickly introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Darth Chaco. Darth Chaco on TikTok, Darth Chaco on YouTube, Darth Chaco IG on Instagram, which I ignore mostly. Sorry. And yeah, we just talk Star Wars. I'm gonna be coming out with a lot of new content now that I am unemployed officially. But yeah, glad to be here. We had Sawyer on to talk about uh, this book ages ago, and so it's nice to have it come full circle. Also, High Republic fans, best fans.
Absolutely. I'm Element7 on TikTok at underscore Element7 underscore on Twix and on Instagram with two underscores at the end there because it's so hard for parody across social media. Uh, Also, youtube.com/Dyad in the Force with Darth Chaco as my co host every Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific. And a new addition to the network, Yoda's Hut is back. and that's every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Today will be at 6 p.m. or whenever we end this. Um, and just to kind of whet your guys' appetites, tonight's Yoda's Hut, I'm going to be watching Literature Devils, Rey, Mary Sue, and Luke Skywalker's
Oh
and I'm
God!
going to debunk it point for point, minute by minute, just so that is out there in the archives and ready for people to watch, and to get citations for, because
It's such a terrible video.
it is, and it's something that's linked to often whenever we hear Rey and Mary Sue. Oh, like, what is your evidence? Just watch this YouTube. I'm like, come on, just probably want a cracker. Anyways, you can find me there all across socials that way. And yeah, glad to be here. Longtime friends of Sawyer, and be talking about Light of the Jedi again.
Yes.
Also, Mr. Chris in the chat. We gotta grab a beer. We gotta grab a beer. You know,
Yes,
nice to
we
see.
do. We love
other
Chris.
people
Chris is
down here.
amazing.
Also, Choco's on OnlyFans / Darth Choco. Double boiler.
DarthChocoFeetPics.com. .org. It's more of a service, you know.
Anyway, I did just want to briefly. I've got a lot of questions about how can you do a book club through YouTube Live, which is a very good question, but I promise that I've had this idea brewing for a while now. What I really hope for this conversation is, obviously, Chaco, Element, and I are going to be leading the discussion, but please, please, please utilize that live chat. I want everybody to share their ideas. If you've read the book 3 years ago or you just finished reading it this past week, we're going to pose a lot of questions, and all of the questions that we discuss tonight are going to be questions that are completely open for you guys to participate in. So without further ado, I think we can get right in. And first of all, I just want to ask, do you, to the panel and to the viewers, do we think that the High Republic is a good entry point to Star Wars reading? And does Light of the Jedi set up the series for it to be a good entry point for Star Wars reading? Because we're here to spread the love of Star Wars books and celebrate them and try to get more people interested in them. Do we think that this is a good jumping off point?
Definitely. It's a great entry point into Star Wars itself. But it's also a great entry point for anybody who has fallen off of Star Wars, has been a fan, and is now coming back, because it's such a new era, and the way the book sets it up in the beginning is there is no need for you to point to anything in the past. There's no need for you to make any kind of connections or narrative through lines to what we've known before. You're dumped straight into the world, and it already goes to work trying to establish some new characters, and you're not sitting there being like, okay, so how does this pertain to the prequels? How does it pertain to any of the other stories we've gotten so far? And it's such a breath of fresh air, right? Because all of the books that we've read so far up until this point has always been interstitials to the Skywalker saga. Whether it's a sequel to the saga or the prequel to the saga or in between. So yeah, you're already in a good position to learn about new characters and jump into this kind of, should I say plot? Are we spoiling or not spoiling?
We'll get into spoilers in like just a couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just great to be able to jump in and have no kind of requirements to know anything about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, largely agree. Like, if you look at just about anything else, you know, I would say arguably, The Mandalorian was another great entry point for people because it was self-contained, at least at the start, versus like, you know, I have people ask me all the time, "Oh, should I watch Ahsoka? I haven't watched Rebels and I haven't seen Clone Wars." And like, yeah, you can watch it, but there's going to be more connections had you seen other stuff. You don't have to worry about that in the High Republic at all. Um, I will also say that I thought they did an amazing job with the first 3 books. because of the styles of all three are extremely well written. And we're talking Light of the Jedi, Test of Courage, and Into the Dark.
Mhm.
All three of them extremely well written, but all written differently. So I've had people who did struggle to get into this book. Um, I will say it has a long ramp up, but the ramp is pretty hype. But it is a little like a roller coaster where you're like trudging up the hill to
Yeah.
the very top for a bit. Um, and if that's not your speed, then try Test of Courage, and then try Into the Dark, and then you'll come back to this one. I guarantee it. But
Mhm.
yeah, great entry points for anyone who's just like getting into Star Wars, because you don't have to know much of anything.
Yeah, and I really love this comment that Wednesday 1310 says, yes and no. It's great if you want to read the High Republic, but outside of that, it's not like a lot of the books set in the main trilogies. I think that's a really great point. I think that the High Republic definitely, it's its own era. It was a fresh era that we had never seen before in Star Wars, and because of that, it is its self-contained story. There are references and there are some characters that pop up that we've seen before in other Star Wars media, but for the most part, it is its own thing. And I think I agree with this comment. I don't know what you guys think. I agree that in a way, because it's its own self-contained era, it does read a little bit differently to other Star Wars books. I think there are similarities, like a Claudia Gray novel is going to be a Claudia Gray novel. She has her own style of writing, but I do think that it's kind of daunting to get into the High Republic, right?
It
A
is,
lot of books came out very quickly. That's for
and
damn sure.
that's why I think their decision to make this sort of like a movement across several different authors works so well, right? Because you pointed out Claudia Gray has her own style. She's a clinician in character driven stories. And Charles Soule, I would argue, is a clinician in world building. And so, like, a counterpoint to Chaco's point about not a lot of people, or there were a few people who had a hard time getting into Light of the Jedi. It's kind of the same feeling getting into the Old Republic. Uh, if all you've done is play Star Wars: The Old Republic, KOTOR 2, and your first novel was the Bane trilogy or Deceived, if you're hardcore, uh, those books are really really wordy, really really long. You have like half a novel's worth of a chapter in Deceived. Um,
That's a great book, though.
It's a
it
great
is,
chapter, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's normal. I don't think it's a detriment to Star Wars. I think the job of setting up an entirely new era is a difficult task. And while I won't hold it against anyone for having a hard time getting into this book, I think this book does require a bit more patience. Just being kind of aware that they're gonna do a lot of stuff in the first book, and then as you go forward, it'll get easier, right? The way we felt about A New Hope was like, why are we spending 30 minutes with these two droids in the desert? Like, why is this
Yeah.
important?
Yeah.
Again, just to clarify, that what I was trying to say is, if you are struggling to get into this book, that doesn't mean you won't like the High Republic era or those books. I was
Mhm.
just trying to say that the first three books are like a perfect, like a trifecta. In this one is a little too dense. Okay, start with Test of Courage, and then you'll love the characters, and then the era. Then read the other one,
Mhm.
or that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, I think those are all great points. And also, two things. First of all, if you have friends who are High Republic fans, or folks you know who have just read the book or have read the book, tell them, let them know that we're having this discussion, because we'll be here for an hour and a half, maybe even two. We love to yap. But yeah,
Shout out
bring
to
them
Yap Sesh.
in. Shout out to self promo to my own podcast. Um, But yes, please tell them on Twitter, on Discord, wherever they are, to come on down and participate in this discussion. But the second thing I wanted to say is for those of you in the chat, I know that the three of us on this panel have all read this book a long time ago, is when we first read this book. But I would love to hear just a poll of how many of you read this book for the first time for this book club, or just recently read it for the first time, first getting into the High Republic, or did you read it again to discuss it? I'm curious.
Yeah. Side note, I think we're gonna rename High Ground Black Sesh. It's,
I support it. I support it.
I think it works.
Still appropriate for the Dyad Network. Should Yoda's hut be I don't know, fried rice?
Actually,
I would probably spell it differently. We'll do some wordplay with fried rice.
There we go. Hannah says she read it slowly over the course of 3 years, but she got there eventually.
Shout out to
Also,
Hannah, by the way.
Hi, Hannah. How are you? It's a long time.
I will say, and for those of you who may be, second read for the book club, read it right when it came out. Yep. I will say at the end of today's session, I will be telling you what the next book is, and you'll have a full month this time to read it. And I can't say much, but I'll give you a hint. Hannah is currently reading what is this next book. So, any guesses? I'm not going to tell you if you're right.
50 Shades of Grey.
No, this is a Star Wars book club. 50 Shades of Elzar, maybe?
Yeah.
But let's get into this book, guys. This is going to be spoiler territory, so we're going to start off at the beginning. So if you haven't finished the book, you're still safe. But we will talk about the end of it. Don't make the same mistake I did. Make sure that you're reading your book cover to cover before you participate in the book club. Or don't. I don't care about spoilers personally.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the beginning of this book, because I think regardless of whether you warmed to it quickly or not, Light of the Jedi starts off with quite literally a bang, and is, in my opinion, the most intense start to a Star Wars story that I have personally read. And I think my first thoughts reading it were like, is this Star Trek? Because I'm so used to disaster and like horrific things happening in Star Trek, and horrible things happen in Star Wars, but there's like a fantasy element to it where the stakes don't always feel like you feel removed from the stakes. But the way that they set this book up in the first few chapters, they introduce you to these lovable characters, and then they kill them off immediately.
Yeah.
And there's something very human about that. So I would love to hear everyone's thoughts.
I love how a little earlier Qui-Gon Ben in the chat said the novels connected to the Skywalker saga are limited by the characters that appear elsewhere. Nothing is off limits in the High Republic. Anyone can die. No character is safe. And yeah, ain't that the truth? I mean, I like Star Wars books because we get like a new perspective or different stories or different places in the universe. And so I went into this. We went into this because they released the first 8 chapters as like a little preview thing, and we start reading it. And I'm like, oh, head of cassette. Okay, so we're getting like a badass like space trucker lady. Like this is gonna be a cool read. Nope. That ended real quick, and then just jumping between the people whose lives are being cut short, but each one of them being so relatable. I think I always talked about, there's one character who's just at work. He's thinking about the cute bartender that he wants to ask out. He has a crappy boss, and
Hashtag
just
relatable.
like that. It just, I don't know, it hit hard.
Yeah, the beginning of the book. I always attribute the beginning as the first 8 chapters because that's what they released, and that's what really set the tone for me going into it, and that's what really caused me to read it in 3 hours to post a video at 6 a.m. I was like, hey, I read this book already. Uh, it's such a great setup. Meeting Hedda Cassett and the entire ship basically, you don't expect it to be a complete wash, right? You expect it. Oh, there something's happening, right? They're going through some stuff, and then you kind of think that there's gonna be some survivors so that they can talk about this and report this thing, but like that doesn't happen. So that's your first taste of nothing is off limits with the light of the Jedi, but the one thing that really set the tone for the book and set the tone for just in general how we're going to feel is heroism, and just like Qui-Gon Ben said, anyone can die. So we start off being introduced with Hedda Cassett, and then we get the disaster, and then you get your first taste of anyone can die. But then when you first hear, and I always say this because, and Chaco knows this, because it gave me such adrenaline and goosebumps when you first read the lines, "This is Avar Chris, or Jedi Master Avar Chris. We're here to help." And I was like, "That's a Jedi." And it snowballs from there, you know.
Yeah. I think that there's something one criticism I have seen of this book, yeah, which is valid, and I'm sure it must be even more difficult to me, like reading the audiobook versus the physical book. There are a lot of names to remember in Light of the Jedi, especially. Like Light of the Jedi, I would say, is a very like heavy lore and world building novel.
Yeah.
And but to me, it's almost like I remember Hedda Cassett. I remember a lot. I mean, I remember Kevin Tarr, and Kevin Tarr does have a prominent role in the story, but there are these characters that names that I wouldn't ever think to remember necessarily because they have such fleeting roles, but they set up from the beginning that all bets are off and the stakes are so high and anybody can die at any moment. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like that prompted me to remember names more because I was like, wait, what?
I mean, I feel like, at least from my perspective, I always read with my lore Bible out so I can always update it. But during the beginning, there was just me going, okay, there's Amy, she's this and that, and then like the next sentence she dies. I'm like, never mind. Shout out to all of the vectors that were flying with Barry that day.
Aw, yeah. But it's there's so much packed into this first part of the book with the Jedi, introducing the Jedi, and we have some really epic force powers that are used even in this first part of the book, but all throughout the book, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But what are some, just speaking for the first, part of the book, whether you consider that the first 8 chapters or what is actually considered like the first part of the book, what are some standout moments for you personally? And this is for everybody in the chat as well.
So if it helps, I like to separate the book into 3 parts, which is the Great Disaster. That's part 1. Part 2 is the Paths, and then part 3 is the Storm. And I think the book actually has those parts laid out.
I think so, yeah.
I can't really remember, but if it does, awesome. So I guess in the first part, it's all about the rescue effort for me that stands out. This whole introduction of Avar being able to connect everyone together in a concerted effort to move this to Bana gas tank. And like reading that one line where it's like, I don't know where Yoda is, but I'm sure he's sending us his energy. And I just like picture him like chewing on his Geimer stick, going, "Oh, we're here." Oh. And that was just incredible. It kind of opened up really the upper ceiling for a lot of what we knew what could be done in the Force canonically. You know, that was like a spirit bomb. They canonized a spirit bomb, but less a bomb and more like a big hand moving things in space.
Share your energy with me.
Yeah. Qui-Gon Ben says, does Avar's ability to connect every Jedi together through the Force feel like a battle meditation to anyone else, or an updated version of it? That's definitely how I read it. However, I will say that when I first read Light of the Jedi, I was coming right off of reading Revan, because Revan was the first novel that I read. And that was actually before I had played KOTOR. So I think I was playing KOTOR in conjunction with reading Light of the Jedi and learning about those characters and Bastila's battle meditation. So to me, that's what it felt like, I would say.
I do believe the reference book has canonized it as battle meditation.
Woo!
Yes.
There we go.
So it is. It is a canon version of it, and it doesn't act quite the same way as Bastila's, but for all intents and purposes, it is the same.
Well, there you go. There's your answer.
I mean, and realistically, I mean, in the context of what's happening, it is the same thing. It's just being used in a
Very
different
differently, yeah.
way. But yeah, in this moment, you know, for me, when we were really in, when we had our characters, you know, talking about how they viewed the Force and you know what it meant for them, that was amazing for me because that's something I always wanted. I always knew, you know, everyone would connect differently, but to see how different everyone saw it, and oddly enough, that's how we became good friends with Cal Forer. You know, he was in the chat when we were discussing that part. And I don't know, it was just such a time that just brought people together, like in the fandom and stuff. Another big thing for the rescue effort to me was the introduction of Buryaga Yagaberry.
Aww.
He's the goat, you know, and being the first person to feel that there were survivors. Um, they introduced a lot of characters in very like that section. We got introduced to all of our main characters. Not everyone survives, obviously, but they gave every character, whether they survived or not, the same amount of care, which is what makes it so difficult when you lose them, or what makes it hard to be able to guess who is going to live and who isn't. But everyone is so realized, you know. That's what I enjoyed the most about it.
Yeah, for sure. And Escape Reality Films, our friend Caleb says, getting my favorite new Jedi almost immediately with loading Greatstorm and his relationship with Belle. Absolutely. I just this morning, or was it maybe it was last night? I can't remember. Billy's on a business trip, but I just got a text from him that was like, I love loading Greatstorm. And I was like, I knew you would. Everyone does.
It's Agaburi.
Yeah. It's Agaburgi. But yeah,
But this is actually one of those things that I always ask people now, because I think in Legends it's Chewbacca Bakachu, right? And in the High
is
Republic,
it?
and then in the High Republic it's Buryaga Agaburi, and so what is Gunji's name? Would be Gunji G Gunj.
What's Chrysanthemum's name?
Chrysanthemum Sandcurse. Or no, wait, isn't it Black Chrysanthemum? So it would be Santin Black.
Oh, I hate Bakachu. That's crazy. I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, right back at you.
Oh no, my document. Um, but yeah, one thing we haven't talked about is hyperspace, and I think we can talk a little bit more about this when we talk about the Nile. But um, uh, Pep asks, or Element, for those of you who are acquainted, you put your name. Um, what do you think about the added lore of hyperspace with prospecting and the Centecas? We get a lot of interesting hyperspace lore in this novel that we haven't had before, either in Legends or canon. It was hyperspace acted a little bit differently in Legends anyway, but we get the introduction or the concept of hyperspace lanes and them carving new paths, and we get the whole thing with Mari Santeca, who can create paths with her mind. Thoughts on that? Did that feel? I almost wondered, was it easy to believe, or did it feel? Was it a challenge because we haven't really had hyperspace like contested in that way before?
I'll only speak minimally about this because I want to set up Chaco for his victory dance. But the lore with Mari Santeca, the added lore on hyperspace prospecting is something that we've always speculated upon. But specifically with Mari Santeca, it really adds to Chaco's lifelong, I would say, lifelong speculation of what hyperspace is. And I'll let him take it from here.
Yeah, and also I want to say I never felt that hyperspace acted differently in the expanded universe. There were certain things that just weren't explored in it, but there's nothing that conflicts or doesn't still
Mm-hmm.
fit. But yeah, that being said, I've always been under the impression that hyperspace was intrinsically connected to the Force, and that um, especially when you watch Rebels and you have like a loath wolf walk through hyperspace to the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've always wondered if that is if the world between worlds, if you is like the core, it's one place where all
Mm,
time exists simultaneously, and then hyperspace is cutting through space time. And so if that's like the core, and then you have layers of it, and there's a lot. I should make a full on video a breakdown, trying to dig down to the bottom of it. But this has confirmed a lot of my feelings on hyperspace and its how it exists in nature. Because we also have Purgle and stuff like that that also access it naturally,
mm-hmm.
and its relationship with the Force.
We also have, from the Jedi texts, Thorpe's Chain Worlds Theorem, which is an ancient theorem that supposes all of the points in the world between worlds are connected by hyperspace. So uh, it's interesting to think about how we can look at hyperspace and real space, but also parallel to that, the living force and the cosmic force.
Yeah. Now there is one way it does differ from the expanded universe, though, and that's one way I actually really enjoy, and that's that in the Old Republic, the galaxy was the same. Like it was the same. It was the same size, the same planets.
Mm-hmm.
Everything operated roughly the same. Um, the factions had the same like design language behind their ships and manufacturing and buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
I like that this is in the past. So we aren't really even out on the outer rim yet. We're mostly talking exploring stuff that would be considered mid rim at this point in time. Um, and hyperspace prospecting is just a really cool idea, just in general.
Yeah, I would agree. And I like what Wednesday's saying, questioning what the old republic will look like, because we do have some reason to believe that there will be more Old Republic content in canon at some point, given the timeline they put up, I think last year at Celebration. Um, and it would have to look a little different because we've established this era of canon where we're out on the frontier and we're exploring new worlds and colonizing, or
And new
yeah, colonizing new
civilizations
worlds.
boldly go when no man has
Not
gone
to
before.
we're Star Trekking. No, but yeah, colonizing in a way. The Republic certainly does colonize some of these worlds, um, and yeah, I'm interested to see what canon Old Republic. That's a good question. Any thoughts on that?
Certainly has to look different. Just like Chaco said, like the design language, like we even have ancient Sith symbol that's not that doesn't look like what it is in the original trilogy and moving forward. So I mean, we have the ancient symbol of the Jedi, which more accurately reflects the Prime Jedi mural. Um, but going off of what we know of the Old Republic right now in Legends, it's everything was the same. Like
Mm-hmm.
Tython is pretty out there in terms of galaxy space. But back in 4,800 BBY, the Republic was bustling, had bustling routes through Tython, and it was really strange. And I didn't really think too much of it at the time because I was a lot younger when I played SOTOR, when I first played SOTOR and KOTOR, and just like seeing how the fidelity of technology was roughly the same. Like even the ships they were using were, even though they were based off of Venators, they still were like, hey, ship design
There's
hasn't changed in 4,000 years.
yeah. I think they tried to say that like, oh no, they were inspired by the old classic design, and that's why they're saying. I mean, like, it was weak. No, I feel like we should be limited because one thing that is kind of cool though is when you look at how the galaxy spread out. You know, how people or and entities spread out across the galaxy, just in general. And you have like these core worlds that people lived all over. This is obviously kind of like the wellspring, that people did all the stuff on, and then started to go out to different planets to create the column. That's why you have the colonies. Um and so you have other worlds that are not going to be as densely populated, right? The reason people are like, oh, how come there's only single biome worlds? And you're like, well, most galaxies, most planets are just deserts. But what's more than that, a lot of places from like towards the mid rim and further are only colonized in one place so that they can export one resource to back to other planets, and that's how they start to spread. So if we go Old Republic, I think we could get a smaller galaxy, but I think that could add to this unknown, add to them stumbling into Mandalorian space,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
finding I don't, I feel like the Sith will probably be different, but if you had a faction of people who broke off much earlier and then intertwined with the Sith species, and then they came back, um, yeah, I think you might be able to do some stuff with the Ricotta and
Oh yeah.
just kind of extraterrestrial technology from outside the centralized, and have that be something that unites those core planets and stuff.
I would frame it a little differently. I don't think the galaxy needs to get smaller, but rather it needs to reframe itself in a way that is unfamiliar. Because if we think about how big the galaxies can be, it's more kind of like if we go to the Old Republic, we need to kind of stay away from Tatooine, stay away from a lot of outer rim planets, and you can make new planets that we've never been to before that are that are known in this time, but still within the purview of wherever their expansion is kind of located during this time period. So we can create like 6 new planets and 6 new sectors that
Mhm.
still paint the galaxy as some kind of limited scope, but you know not necessarily create a galaxy where only like 3 planets exist. Like again, the Mandalorian system would be a great one. We can explore planets that existed in antiquity, like Kalevala, and stay there and not like go to Concord, not go to Mandalore. Um, Trying to paint like an ancient picture of some systems that we know. Like the
Mm.
Rishi
Mm-hmm.
Maze. We can still go to the Rishi Maze, but not find Camino. You know what I mean? This is how
Oh,
big the galaxies are.
yeah, that's true.
Also, shout out to I'm a Spooky Kitty.
Yes. Where are they? Thank you for
Yeah,
subbing. And y'all don't forget to give this video or this stream a like. And again, tell your friends. Come on down, hang out with us.
Spooky
Um,
Kitty has been in Dyad in the Force, and I've also seen their name popping up in the live streams of the anti-grifter verse. Um, Anthony Gramuglia, Eric DeBunks, Pillar of Garbage. Those are some great channels. And Spooky Kitty is there. He's like, yeah, fight against the grifters. It's like, yeah.
um, but yeah, anyways, I wanted to switch gears. I would really like to have a conversation about the Jedi because this is Light of the Jedi. And we talked a little bit already about the battle meditation and them moving the Tibanna gas and Avar Chris's I'm Jedi Master Avar Chris. I'm here to help. Um, but one question I wanted to pose to everyone is, did your perspective of the Jedi change through reading this book? For the good, I doubt for the worse, because in my opinion, this is the best we've ever seen the Jedi. But I was coming from a place of like pretty deep-seated Jedi hatred when I read this book, and I came out of it going, wait a second, I think I've misunderstood the Jedi. So was that a shared experience? I know for the Dyad, you guys have never been Jedi haters, so that wouldn't be something that you could relate to. But I'm curious to see if anyone else had a similar experience.
I mean, I would qualify my stance on the Jedi as not particularly a hater or a defender, although a lot of people would label me as an apologist. I'm more of like a realist. Um, and my view of the Jedi had always been that of a cautionary approach, a measured approach to any institution, any organization with when it comes to labeling them or viewing them as a monolith, because stretching back to the original trilogy and back to the prequel trilogy, I've always viewed them as a symbol, but a symbol that is made up of flawed individuals. And for the most part, their message is good. And when it comes to individuals training there, sometimes they have misinterpretations of it. I mean, Anakin's a great example of someone who really embodied the symbol of the Jedi and the message of the Jedi, but in whose flaws were manipulated and gaslit into believing that what his views were of the world were justified and um, enabled. And like looking back at the history of the Jedi, 25,000 years of history, they've only lost reportedly 20. So it's tough to kind of say the Jedi or are this or that as a conglomeration. You're always
Mm-hmm.
going to get flawed people.
Yeah, my view on this is Matt Lantern is too damn charismatic. That's the real problem. Let's be honest. The Clone Wars um made Anakin a lot more likable as an individual as we got to see his day to day. And because of this, a lot of people start to view the galaxy from Anakin's perspective. And then at that point, everything becomes the Jedi's fault. When you're like, no, not the Sith Lord that's been specifically manipulating you to fall down this path, like intentionally and driving the wedge, not him. Okay. And so I did love getting to see more into the Jedi because all the crumbs are there. I've always thought it was really cool how like the Jedi how um and most of it is just so that women can be scantily clad, but they'll have the Mary Allens be able to dress like Mary Allens, and so like they value individuality as well as being in a group, but that's exemplified by seeing how different they are and how they view the Force. We get to also see the decision making in certain circumstances of like, your Jedi Vector doesn't fire. You can't shoot shots until you put your lightsaber in them to engage, meaning it's very, very intentional whenever they use their lightsabers or whenever they consider taking a life. Um, I like getting more insight into that, but yeah, it's largely how I've always felt, and I don't particularly find that they've been anti Jedi, but I feel like people looking from again Anakin's perspective specifically have been taking the wrong message away.
Mm.
For me, I've always especially looked at George Lucas and how George, like I'll hear people say, "Oh, the purpose of the Clone Wars was to show how the Jedi were actually the problem, or whatever," and you're like,
No.
that was not the purpose. Like George Lucas very clearly says that I wanted to show you how a good person can turn evil and how a democracy can turn into a dictatorship, right? The messages people took a little different, but George Lucas literally lives his life like a Jedi. Like that was always he was very clear that they are the most moral authority in the galaxy and they are what we should
Mhm.
aspire to be.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do want to address old Mr. Chris. Um,
This comment?
the Jedi is what we aspire to be. Fast forward, and we're playing drinking games to their flaws, and I think that's largely the product of the stories we're trying to tell. You know, we got the
It's the
prequels.
Superman problem.
Yeah, we got the prequels. In which case that was a critical analysis to how the Jedi responded to the undermining of their foundations by a Sith
Mhm.
Lord. Um, and then we got the Acolyte, which is kind of it's still 100 years before, but you still have to lead up to that point. You still have to show the signs of their hubris. Um, and I think this is why I myself want to get away from the prequels. I want to either go to Rey's New Jedi Order or go to Dawn of the Jedi or the Old Republic, where we can possibly get a story where we just get a win for once. We don't need to keep on seeing Jedi falling to the dark side and kind of like seeing the temptation of the dark side winning and painting the Jedi as a bunch of people who can't handle, you know, these things. Because like I said, when we paint a picture of scale and scope, it literally is just a few people over thousands of years. And so we just need a story where the Jedi stop the villain and being like, that was great. Let's all get drinks.
Well, but even like the Acolyte, because I get people are like, oh, it's making the Jedi. And like, no, you have individual people who went against the rules of the Jedi. They went
Mhm.
against what they were supposed to do as a Jedi, and it failed. And I don't know how you blame that on the Jedi. You know what I mean? Like if if the rule is like, hey, don't do this or this will happen, and then you do that, you can't blame the organization that was like, no, we knew that would happen, so we made the rule. I don't know. That's always been strange to me.
Yeah. No, all great points, and I think that we could talk for hours about the Jedi and our individual opinions about them. Um, I think that I still lean more Jedi critical. Um, but as Carter Sauce said earlier, this really is the golden age, and it was a refreshing eye opener for me personally to go, oh, okay, this is what the Jedi are supposed to be. And yes, the Jedi are not, they're made up of individuals who are, some of whom are flawed. Um, but it was really magical to see the Jedi all, um, being exemplary of your Kanan Jarrus, your Qui-Gon Jinn, your the Jedi that were the heroes in the movies that and the shows that we grew up with. And um,
I would
anyway,
I would add
Yeah,
Ahsoka to that
it's
list.
oh yes, definitely
yeah.
Ahsoka. um,
It's perspective, it's who the camera is following. If when it's following Anakin, things will appear one way. When it's following Avar Chris, things will appear another way.
mhm. And shout out to Charles Soule and the Luminous team for this concept of how each individual Jedi feels and views the Force, because that I think is one of the coolest additions to the Star Wars lore that we get in this book is, you know, Avar sees the song of the Force and Elzar sees these waves, this ocean. And I just love that element. It was so beautifully written. And Element asks for the whole chat, would like to know what you guys would see the Force as if you were a Jedi. And I don't even know if I could answer that question. But do you
You're
guys
gonna
have an
have to.
answer?
We're gonna force you to answer that.
Okay,
No.
I'm going to think about it, but I would love to hear everybody else's answer as to what they would see the Force as.
Mine's pretty simple. I'm a game designer and I work in Unreal, Unity, and sometimes proprietary engines, and so I see the world as a bunch of quads and polygons, and I would imagine using the force to move something would be the same as clicking on that mesh and moving it with the gizmo, and it's in editing its transform properties. So yeah, if you've ever seen a game world under the hood with all of the everything you can click on and maneuver, that's how I would be seeing things as I move it.
What about you, Chaco?
Um, I don't talk about it very much anymore, but as a musician, I also see it as music. But specifically, um, specifically kind of orchestral, like as if you were conducting, and so you can hear a melody and then have it build and grow and grow and grow, and you can slow down the tempo, you can raise it, like depending on the circumstances and what's going on. You can change the intensity, you can isolate certain instruments or sound qualities, um and raise them up or down. And so that's kind of how I see the Force. um like if you're building up for a major force push, then like the timpanis would start going off, and then like you would raise the intensity up until. But of course, there's moments you would need quiet or a light touch or you know,
Yeah,
music.
Carter Saw says, speaking of Avar, part of me would love if they released a soundtrack of what she hears.
Oh.
Um, to which I say it would probably be like the power of many.
Let's see, what do we got? We got Stray Bard Art says they would see it as a painting or a dance. Old Mr.
Ooh.
Chris would see it as a temperature or feel it as a temperature. I like that.
Well, okay. So elaborate on that, Mr. Chris. is the light side cold or hot, or is the dark side cold or hot? If
Ooh.
we're to go with like, you know,
Or does that
um,
paradigm even work in that
yeah,
in this context?
because cold or hot can be either dark and light depending on, well, depending on how you feel about the four seasons. Like if your favorite season is the winter, you're like, yeah, the light side's all like snow and snowmen and sledding. Or it could be like it's a barren Arctic blizzard.
Dashing
That's the
through the
dark side.
forest.
Yeah. I would more often than not attribute the dark side to a hellish landscape. So just just going off of the acolyte, that one kid saying, "I see fire," and then consuming everything, and so that to me matches. But how would you attribute different temperatures to the different parts of it?
I was thinking like an infrared thermometer.
Okay, like a FLIR.
Yeah.
So you would see. Oh, so you would literally be seeing luminous beings, really?
Yeah.
To be honest.
I don't know if that's the scientist in me. I can't think of what I would. I don't know. I'm autistic. I have hard time visualizing things like that. I don't know that I know what I would see the force as. Maybe like a drum
That's
beat.
cool though.
Maybe like a really like intense drum beat depending on how force sensitive something was. Um
Yeah.
but
Chris says the cold is the dark side or out of balance. Yeah, like I said, it depends. It's
that makes
either
sense.
it's either snowmen and snow angels and sledding, or
Yeah.
an Arctic blizzard that just like freezes over.
That would be cool though. If there's like a warm temperature that you feel, and then like you feel like a prick of cold or something like an icy breeze, and you're like, ooh, something's afoot. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that person is kind of cold. I don't know why. We need to investigate.
Yes. No, fire, passion is very dark side, but consciousness, love, compassion as an individual comes across as warm. Yeah, I would agree. Ooh, Wednesday says maybe how it feels depending on how the side you draw from. Draw from the light and the dark feels cold. Draw from the dark and the light feels cold. Interesting. And Dan Leckie says they imagine the force like a wave. Very cool. And yeah, I think Jordan poses a I don't know what's happening. I can't click on the comment, but Jordan Wright says, here we go. There we go. I've always thought of it as a metaphor for God. Absolutely. I can totally see that. I would imagine that a lot of people agree with you.
I mean, George's whole philosophy on the Force was taken from Buddhism, so you could definitely deify it. I mean, there's Mortis gods.
True. Just a reminder, guys, I will be announcing what the next book is at the end of this. So tell your friends if they weren't able to make it to the book club, maybe they can make it for the tail end where I tell you what we're reading next. But one more question I wanted to talk about in regards to the Jedi, because I don't want to talk your guys' ear off for the rest of the night, but something I really do want to touch on is the relationships that we see in this book and also the rest of the High Republic and how they differ from the attachments we see or the I guess taboo nature of relationships that the prequel Jedi have in comparison with how attachment is in this book and the rest of the High Republic. What are your thoughts on that? And also, do you see any similarities between we have a very strong master and apprentice relationship in this novel between Loden and Bell. Do you see any similarities between the other master and apprentice relationship we see most prominently in Star Wars, that being Anakin and Obi-Wan, or is it just totally different because of the era we're in and the circumstances?
I'd like to see it as once again, I don't view it as being different, but I just view it as being clarified. Like I
Yeah.
see these people, especially when you have Avar, Elsar, and what's
Stellan.
his name? Stellan. Yes. And,
Oh, High Republic Twitter is not gonna like that.
listen, I'm not a Stellan stan. All right, I'm sorry, but um, no,
You
I'm
might as
not
well
he
say
either.
you
I'm not
hate the
either.
acolyte.
the seeing them together, and then hearing them grow up together and having little crushes and stuff on one another. um I don't see that as being any different than, like, Obi-Wan touching Suritachi's hand in the cafeteria and feeling embarrassed about it when he's a Padawan, right? They had those types of relationships always. They just always expected them to kind of grow out of them. And not necessarily in this book, but also very early on in Into the Dark, we actually get very clear answer on how the Jedi view these things, um, from my boy Reese Silas. But yeah, overall, it was refreshing to show what is actually taught. I think that's going to be my ultimate takeaway from this.
Mm.
It's, what do people do versus what they are supposed to do, or what is considered right within the organization, right? Because I think that's a major problem for the Jedi. You can have your Qui-Gon, who's had relationships in the past. You can have your Obi-Wan, who's willing to leave, to go be with someone he loves. We have your Cantum Size and stuff like that, um, who understood, if I'm in this, I'm in this, and if I'm out, I'm out. Um, I'm not going to half-ass two things. I'm going to whole-ass one thing, and I kind of liked to see that kind of exemplified or brought to the front, because you also have people who are going to be cold because they're like, well, it can lead to that, so I'm not going to even get close to anything that can lead to that. But that's not what they're taught. That's how that person chooses to live their life
Hmm.
within that framework.
Yeah. I think it's always been the same. Um, but it's less nebulous in these books. Primarily because what we've known. So we start with the original trilogy, and all we know of the Jedi is that they're gone. Obi-Wan's left, Yoda's left, and they're trying to teach Luke. We go to the prequels, and it's largely from the lens of trying to mitigate what is a disaster in Anakin, for for lack of a better term. So we've never seen the Jedi deal with just normal, right? Just normal conflict, normal rebelliousness. So this is why Chaco and I say that the books are the best of Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
is because we always get these normative experiences in the Jedi where it's normal to be tempted. It's normal to have these moments of anger and these moments of succumbing to temptation. And it's not brought to the extreme in the same way as we see in Anakin, because it's his story. It's the story of his fall, the tragedy, right? And so we have this very extreme look at that case. But in this case, it's very, very normal masters, normal students being like, but what if I do this? Like, listen, we're allowed to have emotions. That's great. We just do not let them rule us. And so like it's like Chaco said, clarified, less nebulous. And so uh that's what I love the most about these books. And the further you along you get into the High Republic, you'll have a very kind of parallel view at what Anakin could have done in a certain
Yeah.
situation, and how I would say easy it was for that person to deal with it. Honestly, he's like, oh man, I need help. Um, but that's a discussion for another time in another book. But yeah, I think the teachings has always been the same, albeit some adjustments, obviously, to the world around them, to the changing political landscape of how the Jedi got more involved. But for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, from the lens of Anakin to the lens of just normal master and apprentices, it seems extreme, but it's not. It's always been the same.
Also, shout out to Race to Crash Point Tower. That book in the very beginning contains a direct explanation for the fans of what attachment actually means. Um, Very plain English.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, good points all around once again, and great discussion in the chat. Thank you all for participating. I really appreciate it. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about the Jedi in this book before we move on to the bad guys?
Um, 9 egg stew sounds delicious. Are
It,
we?
it
We're
does.
just.
I would love to
Uh,
see Yoda and Porter Engle duel or spar.
Oh, who would win?
Yoda.
Yoda would still win, but it'd be fun. No, Porter Engle is a beast, and he was a character type that I didn't know how bad I wanted.
Yeah.
Until
Yeah.
we got him.
And also,
And
oh, go ahead.
well, I mean, he's the guy who's been there. He's seen it all. He is because once again, we only know what we've experienced or seen, right? And so he recontextualizes because we follow people who are learning how to be the best Jedi on this rubric right here, and then we get to see this old Jedi who's done it. He's mastered it. He's done that for hundreds of years, and he's casual. He doesn't have to be strict on certain things. He has fun. Cracks jokes, and he's just an old man mode. He's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of one line from the Elfrona. Um, what are their names? The Blythe family incident, when Porter Engle does something and then Belle's like, I don't even think Yoda can do that. Your boy can do that. I can see Yoda off in some distant planet helping another civilization. He's like, oh, do that I can. But then he goes off and continues helping.
Wednesday in the chat says, I think it's cool that there are Jedi who uh I assume they say just don't care or just don't have to worry about
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. I love we get so many different types of characters in the High Republic that's what really makes it endearing, because now we get conflict from these people, how they rub up against each other, and you know we have Loden just like pushing his Padawan off of towers and spires and stuff and being like, good luck.
Also, yeah, shout out to Ember.
Shout out
Good
to
boy.
Ember. Good girl.
Oh yeah.
She's a girl. Anyway, well, yeah, if there are, oh wait, Wednesday says, I think it's cool that there are Jedi who are more varied than just leaders. Yep, which is what we were talking about a little bit. But I mean, if you guys haven't already, you should read The Blade of Bardata. Really cool short comic run. Or I think it's just one issue, right?
It's one miniseries.
Miniseries,
four
gotcha.
issues, I think.
Oh, I think I just read it in one go. Chris says, my 2 cents since I'm late. I love the triad between Elzar, Stellan, and Avar. I also love the wide array of Jedi power specialties. Yes, absolutely. But you're just in time because we're going to talk about the bad guys. We can't talk about this book without talking about the Nile. I would love to know everyone's first impression of these guys, because at first, for me, I was not impressed. I did not think that these pirates were capable of the mass destruction that they end up being capable of. And I did not think that Markion Rowe would have. I thought he was a derp. I thought he was an idiot. And the way this book wraps up that third act just had me completely flabbergasted and really set the tone. I mean, obviously stakes were high throughout the entire novel, but that reveal at the very end that he's been the mastermind behind literally everything that has gone wrong, even the things that were like minor in scale in comparison to some other things, he was the mastermind behind it all. That set me up for what the rest of the High Republic was, at least phase 1 was
Yeah.
going to look like.
Yeah.
Which makes me mad. So we recently had the privilege of interviewing Mark Thompson, the person who read that audiobook, and I should have asked him, because if you go through this book in the audio format, there are going to be nuggets that you might miss, um, because you didn't pay attention to what voice said it, and then later you're like, oh,
Yeah.
they that was a thing, and I meant to ask him about that.
It's true.
Next
Yeah,
time.
I share much of the same sentiments as Sawyer. The first time they announced this whole initiative, and the first time they released the video of the Nile, I was like, they look cool, but like, how are they going to present a threat to the Jedi? Right? It's a hard thing to put forward, a villain to the Jedi that is not the Sith or not the Mandalorians, because the Sith are very, very, equipped to, be an equal on the battlefield, and the Mandalorians are also similarly equipped to counter everything the Jedi do. And so pirates, to me at that time, represented, just like a wily band of different people that didn't really have unity, didn't really have like major resources, but like, just to kind of give clarity to what Chaco refers to, it was in that very moment during the revelation of the Blythe family's attack, where he's like, "You didn't recognize me, my voice," and you find out that Markion has, it's kind of like a Palpatine moment where he's like,
Chills.
everything
Just
that I've
chills.
done.
My soul like fell out of my body at that moment. I was like, oh, no.
Yeah. It's like the pirate version of everything that has transpired has done so according to my design.
But I mean, yes, that's a good comparison, but I I think that just because I don't know if it's because you're reading it or because the act of him, faking the distress call and also setting up the Nile attack, all of that, like the way that Charles writes so humanely, in the sense that like everything just feels so real and so raw. Like Palpatine doesn't scare me the way that Markion's scheming does. It feels realer to me. I don't know if anyone else can uh if that makes sense what I'm saying, but like Chris says here,
Yeah,
Markion is the best villain we've gotten in ages. I agree.
Qui-Gon Benn
yeah. I
said
think. Oh, good.
he reveals his sinisterness to the readers as he does to the Tempest Runners. They also think he is a derp, and that is what makes him such a sleeper villain,
Mhm.
because the setup and the reveal in the third act essentially makes you think that he is not think they paint him as someone who is weak, who is he's not the strongest person in the room, so how does he command all of these people? And he's not force sensitive, he doesn't have anything going for him that would give him power over all of these marauders and these pirates who, he's got a Doten that's like 5 times his size that is answering to him. And you wonder what's going on beneath the surface that's making them follow someone that isn't the strongest person, that can't just outright be Palpatine and just be like, oh, you're no longer useful, right? So, and then like the reveal where he talks about his family's history with the Jedi and knowing their tricks and being resistant to them. It's it's one of those villains that like you appreciate. You
Mm.
appreciate the villains that cannot by themselves destroy the world, but by their very manipulation and by their very um, designs can ruin it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought where they really succeeded with him is they established his position as the eye as originally as not a position of leadership. He
Mm-hmm.
was just the guy who had access to the thing that they all needed. And so that's why the whole time you're reading it, you're pretty sure yeah, he was some trust
Trust
fund
fund
sociopath.
sociopath.
He inherited this role from his father, and he's just the person. And if Mari Santek, if something happens to them, he's out. Any one of these unhinged weirdos can just like take him down. But then they do, and to me, he's Moriarty from the BBC
Yeah,
Sherlock show.
yeah,
Where I mean, you even get introduced to Moriarty earlier in the series as someone's boyfriend, uh, and that's what makes him so dangerous. Is like, does he have a plan? He has concepts of a plan, but that's what makes him so adaptable and dangerous. And you can, and also he has emotional issues.
I'll also
um,
shout out Mark Thompson for the choice in voice because it also lends to
yeah,
painting that picture, right? Like
mm-hmm.
the first time I saw their reveal of Markion in the YouTube videos before this even came out, I was, as I usually do with my impressions, I was trying to picture how he would sound, like seeing the helmet. He's like, I am Markion Rowe. But then like he comes out in the book and he's like, I will
John Malkovich.
I will bring this world to heal. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, this guy isn't some kind of like, facsimile of a powerful Bane esque type of person. He
Mm-hmm.
sounds very fragile. He sounds very lank, but everything he does has very, very powerful consequences.
Yeah.
I like that you brought up Bane because I feel like they were like, all right, Darth Bane, he's cool, he's bad. Just the exact opposite. We're gonna do the exact opposite
Yeah.
character, and made it work. One of the other things I was concerned about was the Nile themselves as a group, right? That
Yeah.
I saw the initial art and I was like, okay, yeah, space Vikings or whatever I've seen. Space orcs. They remind me of Lord of the Rings orcs. Um, largely. But when we get introduced to the structure of the Tempest runners and how they reflect their runner, and especially Lorna Dees, whose her whole Tempest is just it's they're all like spies. You know what I mean? They are all uh undermining things, subtly. And you got to see that they aren't just yes, they will have some mindless masses running around, but there's a lot more to them than just that at the offset. I think that helped a lot.
I also want to ask Sawyer, do you think do you think the name Gaze Electric is queer coded?
If you want it to be, I mean, I'm going to say that's open to interpretation.
Gotcha. I mean, it's kind of like the same way that I revisited Ranma half or Ranma one half as you grew up. Uh, as a 39-year-old, I was rewatching the remake on Netflix. And I was like, as a kid, I didn't really realize any of this stuff because I wasn't thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, I'm like, is this queer coded? And then I spoke to a friend who also grew up with the anime, um, and they were like, "Yeah, absolutely." He was like, "Yeah, I thought so, but I'm not an expert on it." But Gaze Electric, I feel like my outlook on whether it's coded in any way, it's just I feel like that would be my name if I were a drag queen.
We
Cuz
can make that happen.
I love electricity.
I feel like as a kid, it's like when you're like, oh, Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune they're just cousins, right? They're really close sometimes. So it's kind of weird, when no they edited that out for the U.S.
Yeah.
audiences. Um,
Also, I
never
think
thought about it
Makoto
like
is
that.
lesbian, right?
Who?
I believe so.
Jupiter. I think Sailor Jupiter is canonically lesbian.
Yes, I think so. One of them is.
But I never thought that about the name Gaze Electric, except because of a podcast that exists.
Well, there you go. I mean,
uh, let's see. Wednesday says, I feel like I really need to try these audiobooks. Is Light of the Jedi a good place to start for listening to audiobooks? There's not a bad place to start with it.
Yeah.
I think it is an excellent place to start. You would know what we are talking about now. Yeah, so I either start here or with Lost Stars or
Even if you like reading physical books, just do what I do and listen to it while reading it. Because like Chaco said, like all of the audiobooks for Star Wars are impeccably executed. From the music to the sound effects to all of the voice actors who do the audiobooks, they do a great job of voice acting, and they're just incredible experiences.
yeah. I feel like I should do my audiobook spiel as well. For me, because I like to do both. I grew up always reading books. Um, you'll find that when reading a physical book, or at least I do, I'm reading the word aloud in my head. And that was like a difficult habit to break because you can read faster than you can speak,
Yeah.
and there's a certain disconnect there. But when I have an audiobook, especially like one of these ones, where it is where there are voices, right? So you don't mix up who's talking. There is sound effects, there is breaks and stuff like that. Um, I listen to it a lot faster. I listen to it at around 2x, or I listen to it as fast as my brain wants to take in the information. So it honestly doesn't feel like I'm reading and it doesn't feel like I'm listening. It's just playing in my head. That's how I feel about it.
Chris, it is. I don't know if
what
it's
is the mystery?
region based, but it is available. That's how I
Huh.
read it. I mean, I can give you a sample from the prologue here.
A ship sliced through the shale gray sky overhead. So quickly, it was no more than a line of light and a distant screech, almost lost in the wind. That's a Landa-class shuttle.
Yeah,
Huh?
Lost Stars is on it. Yeah, I have the Audible for Lost Stars.
It's a mystery.
And if you can't find it, message me and we got you.
Yeah, does this have one too? No, there's no narration for the cover that says Lost Stars. I thought this is Lost Stars. Just for some reason.
Yeah, I think I'll try audiobook for the next book that we're going to be reading. I usually do.
I was about to ask. I'm sorry.
What?
Well, I was about to ask what book, but I will stay tuned until the end of the show because that's when we will be revealed.
That's when we will reveal when the next book is. I already made the graphic for it, so I'll post online at the same time. It'll be great. But we're almost done here. I just have a couple more questions that I'd like to go over because this is a pretty dense book and there's a lot to talk about. But one thing we haven't talked about at all is the Chancellor and the Republic in this era. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I was gonna
Is
say,
she a baddie?
a big fan. Okay, first of all, she's got 2 Targons. She just walks around with like giant tigers, like riding tigers. But I really liked in this book that this book broke from so many norms in Star Wars books that I loved it so much. Where I was initially like, oh, well, the Chancellor is obviously going to end up being the evil person and has their own. And like, no, everyone's just doing their thing and everyone has different goals and they'll butt up against each other. Um, Obviously, the Nile are the bad guys, but um, this didn't play out. I just reading the first book, I couldn't tell you how it was going to play out. Um, and it surprised me in a very refreshing way.
Yeah. Lena So is sort of like a measured approach to what a chancellor represents and what a chancellor should be. And what I mean by that is she has in her the aspiration and the ambition of a chancellor. She wants to expand. She
Mhm.
wants to bring the message of the Republic all the way to the far reaches of the galaxy, which is a colonialist, expansionist, conquering type of mentality, but at the same time, the message behind it is so that everyone can share in the prosperity. And so she's brought back in, she's reined in by her her very realistic approach to this ambition. And so being able to be the chancellor, but also respect the decisions and the autonomy of the Jedi Order um, is quite an impressive trait to have,
Mhm.
especially when you have, like I said, an ambition to go further and beyond. Um, so many different, citations from this book where the Jedi naturally push back on the idea of being a military, but Lena So was like, no, no, you're right. Like, I don't want you guys to feel like you're doing this for the Republic, but we kind of need your help. So the Jedi is like, yeah, we're not a military. We shouldn't be doing all of this stuff, but we will help, and the help that they seek is just help in bringing the beacon and being part of the message of expansion. And it's only after the Nile, make their mark on this kind of narrative that the Jedi's help turns into that of a more um, military force, even though they're still independent from the body politic at this point.
Do you think that Lena So was overly ambitious? This is a question for everybody.
Yes. Not overly ambitious, but overly optimistic.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a little bit of naivety in um believing that people would just want the galaxy to work and people to be friends and stuff. you
Well,
know?
it's I disagree with that. Um, Not on principle. I disagree in the sense that I think her ambition is proportional to the galaxy. If you were the president of the United States, for example, and you wanted to expand all throughout the galaxy, yes, that's a little bit overly ambitious. But the chancellor of the Republic, which is already scope wise a large net of planets in a galaxy, uh, her expansion to the outer rim seems proportional to that. Like, if she was like, I want the Republic to stretch to the outer reaches of wild space. That would be overly ambitious, at least to me. But I think for the most part, the message in this book is um, they just have teams going out to ask people to if they wanted to be part of the Republic to improve the communications between the outer and the inner core. And so I didn't get a sense of militaristic occupation in this.
Mhm.
I didn't get a sense of them going to a world and a world was like, no, we don't want you here. And then they pushed themselves on it. Um, I think the Nile represent mostly that thought, but in a very guerrilla-esque way. Um, so, I mean, yeah, I think her ambitions were proportional, but unrealistic.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was kind of speaking in generalities that could extend beyond just this book, but bringing it back to just this book, I agree. Um, and also, someone called out that her Targons might be a nod to Freya, and that's a cool thought. That's something I didn't think about. But yeah, Freya's um,
Mhm.
chariot was being pulled by two male like giant war cats, which is pretty cool. Um, and actually, that's also I'll say. Well, I will say this. One thing I did think is really interesting is because you have this benevolent ruler who wants to bring the good things, prosperity and stuff like that, to the outer rim, to other places, and that's truly their motivator, right, at their heart of hearts. And so, Starlight Beacon is just the antithesis of the Death Star because it is a mobile station, but it's meant to bring peace and that. And I love the reframing of something, and it also brings credence to later on a Death Star of being like, we need this big old giant mobile battle station, and this one will be able to protect itself.
Yeah, the beacon was literally just a communications device to connect the galaxy together. They had like biomes to represent different cultures and stuff there, and juxtapose that to the Death Star. It's funny.
That is not a connection that I had made previously, but it is definitely there. I understand. Um, but
The
I
Life
ultimately
Star.
the life star. Um, I think I agree with Seth. I think I'm a famous Lena So hater, which is a hot take, but we're not going to talk
How
about
dare
that.
you?
You have a hot take that's on right now on TikTok.
I saw that this morning, and I stand by it. But
No, I rewatched it. I was like, yeah, he could have jumped on.
see,
It took about it took like 7 real world seconds for him to reach the point where he had to stand his ground. And so within 7 seconds, they all could have got on and flew away. They probably would have had an explosion behind them and then they just
Mhm.
fly out of it. But there's literally so much time. Like he wastes
Thank
so
you.
much time.
Thank
Because
you.
he's not just turning around and shielding. He turns around and runs for 6 seconds while they watch for 6 seconds and then blocks.
Okay, you heard it here first on the High Republic book club. Kanan Jarrus could have survived in Jedi Knight. Um, Anyway, with that, is there any other points in Light of the Jedi that you guys or anybody in the chat wanted to discuss before we go to closing thoughts? Because this is a book club and I want everyone to be able to bring up whatever talking points they would like.
Really quickly, the biggest thing for me towards the end is just the revelation of this purple rod.
Ah.
Um, when Mark Young's talking about his family's history and how they have a history with the Jedi, and he was taught to resist their abilities, and then just brings out this rod, and I'm just like, what the heck is that thing? Like, that's the biggest thing, biggest question that I had ending the book.
For years.
And you know what? Now
For
that I'm
years, we would just
Oh, go ahead.
for years we would just message each other, be like, "What is the purple rod, though? I don't know. Like, really, what is it?"
But that's so funny that you bring that up, and I'm gonna touch on this briefly before we wrap up. But like, really, when you think about what that purple rod is, knowing what it is, the Light of the Jedi is mild compared to the rest of the High Republic.
Yes, it is. I mean, listen. I can even like reference Phase 2. The entirety of Phase 2 is pretty, heavy. And Phase 3, even more so. But that's what happens when you get a world building setup like Light of the Jedi. Like this book, the end of this book is like, holy crap, where can it go from here? And then you go on with the rest of the books. You're like, that's where it went.
Yeah. And it's like, I think back to that time, reading Elzar having that vision at the very, very end of the book.
Yes.
And seeing the trauma and the horror that will unfold. And I remember going, oh my God, what could this possibly be? And I don't think anything could have prepared me for what the answers actually were. But
Yeah.
To wrap up, and on that note, for those of you in the chat who are new to the High Republic or recently have begun your High Republic journey, my question is, will you continue, first of all? Because it is kind of daunting. You don't have to read all the High Republic books if you don't want to. I recommend reading all of them, but there are a lot. So the question is, will you continue? And do you have any predictions for what's going to happen? Because I certainly know that I had predictions. I was on a panel where everyone on the panel knew exactly what happened because they had read the book early, and I did not know. And I had a prediction, and I was so wrong. So
That was amazing to watch.
While everybody answers that question, Wednesday does have a question for us. If you had to choose just one character as the standout, who would you say it is? For me, it's definitely Belle.
I would agree with that. I would say Belle for me in this book.
I think in this book, the standout was Avar. There are multiple standouts, but if I had to choose one, it was Avar. In this book, because in the others, there's so many different characters that stand out.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. It's hard because I don't know what it means. I'm sorry. So, Belle was like the protagonist vibes of like, this is the guy that you need to latch on as you ride through the High Republic. You know what I mean? That's what it felt like. For me, the standout had to be Loden because Loden was just everything I wanted to be.
Yep, Stray says Loden as well.
Yeah.
Caleb says Loden and Belle. Yeah. Awesome. And then, sorry to cut you off if you have something else to say, Chaco.
Shout out to Indira Stokes.
Oh yeah. And then lastly, for returning readers, folks who have already read this book or read it again for this discussion, were your takeaways any different revisiting this novel than they were when you first read it?
I mean, obviously it was. I've read this book 4 times now. Each subsequent time is a different take. I think the biggest difference being is Markian's behind it, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just looking at that point for all of the different kind of Easter eggs and clues um, pointing to that fact. But it's still a great read. I
Oh.
don't think much has changed other than your perspective on the Nile, to be honest.
Uh, it it changes for me in that you're like, oh, they were so innocent. They're so young. They don't know yet.
Oh, particularly one thing that
uh,
always gets me that never changed specifically is that one. I think it was in part one. That one scene where it was just a space station off in the distance, just minding their own business, and they get struck by an emergence, and they have to evacuate, and it's kind of like a sinking ship trope, and there was like the tail end of that sequence where the guy has to stay behind and everybody's evacuated, and the last thing he says is, "We are all the," and then the way they wrote the subsequent prose after that, I was like, "Don't do that to me." Like I started tearing up. Like that is like a literal, like, kind of like brother in arms, Saving Private Ryan type of moment
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, just say the Republic.
and that's how I would sign off very often.
Oh yeah.
We're all that, and then disconnect.
Chris says, I read the EU like crazy back when it was new. Reading this book felt like a breath of fresh air because of how it was laid out. I thought it was nearly flawless as an introduction. I couldn't agree more. I think this book, I understand why some people have a hard time getting into this book just because there is so much that happens all at once. But for me, that was exactly what I needed. And it is still, probably my top 5 High Republic novels out of all of them. I think it's a banger, literally. um,
Yeah, no,
but
it's what I
yeah.
say to a lot of people. To be honest, like if you were an avid reader of the EU back then, this book, this High Republic era is your first chance to be on the ground level of a new expanding universe. It's
Mhm.
like if you surround yourself in the hate of Star Wars and the rage baiting universe, you would never you'd never experience these stuff. So like all of the comics and the books that exist now is literally a new EU that you can stay up to date with, and there's new things releasing every year. And to kind of nest your experience in Star Wars out of hatred and refuse to read this stuff would kind of be a disservice to the EU of old, you know?
Yeah. And I think you make a great comparison. I mean, I read the High Republic as it was coming out in conjunction with reading the Old Republic novels. And I think that they are very similar in the world building that is involved and the way that they stand out on their own in comparison to the rest of what happens in the known Star Wars universe. Um, but Chris has a question for us, which is, do we think that the High Republic chronologically could serve as a TV show if we started with Light of the Jedi and made a faithful adaptation? I'm going to say yes.
I'm gonna say no.
Chronologically.
I don't know if we could do all of it chronologically, but if you stuck with like the 3 adult novels, I feel like that could be done. I think it could be done. Do I think it will be done? No. Do I think it would succeed in a viewership standpoint?
I could see it as a TV show. I think it works
Mhm.
chronologically.
I think
I
so.
think I think I think from phase 1 to phase 3, there's a lot of ancillary books on the side that give you um that give you like a let's look at the main books as kind of like the vertical of the TV show, right? And then A Test of Courage, Out Into the Dark, all of the ancillary books outside of the main ones could serve as sub arcs within a season. And I think in a TV show format, you could definitely hit all of the story beats
Mm-hmm.
chronologically. In a trilogy or in a movie format, you're gonna have to pick and choose your beats
Yeah,
wisely. So
I agree.
And
from a
the
sense of TV
reason
show, it works.
the reason I'm on the no side of it is I don't know, maybe I'm a weirdo with this type of thing, but I am very um keyed into the narrative, like what is the specific story that this is being told. And so I think of the High Republic books, so many of them will have different sections and sub narratives that I think it might be difficult
Mm.
um, to try and tell a singular and cohesive like one story because the different books all have different narratives and different main characters, and everyone is doing their thing. But I mean, I suppose that they might be able to do it. I am also on team. I don't need live action or even animated versions of things I've already seen or read. Um, Absolutely, give me a story in the High Republic.
Mm-hmm.
Give me the story of a group of Padawans who, on their first outing, um, all this stuff breaks out, and they have to survive on a planet while the Nile are running around doing stuff. You know what I mean? Or give me, a narrative that specifically follows Avar. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but there's I don't want things to get too bogged down with having too many separate stories to tell, and then you have to cut a lot of stuff out in order to make it fit, and then we end up missing a lot of things. I That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's two separate questions for me.
Hmm.
Do I think I think it could work? Do I
Yeah.
want do I want it? Probably not.
All right. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My heart feels very happy. I was not sure how this was going to go, and I think it went about as well as it possibly could have gone. So, thank you to everyone who participated tonight and offered their thoughts and read this book. Thank you to the Dyad for being here and celebrating Light of the Jedi with me. We've come full circle in that way. I have one more thing to share with everyone. Um, I think this was a resounding success, and we're going to do it again next month. The date is not final, but the next book that the Star Wars Book Club will be reading is, drum roll please, Lost Stars by Claudia Gray.
There we go. Audiobook
So
available. Just kidding.
yes,
I don't know where it
if
went.
I don't know where the audiobook is for Lost Stars, so we might have trouble finding it. But Lost Stars is the next novel. This is a book that has been recommended to me for many, many years, and I've been told is one of the best. So I'm very excited to read it, and I'm excited to share it with y'all. So in about a month, you have a full month this time to read it. We will be going over Lost Stars. Haven't finalized a guest yet, but I will make that announcement when I have it. But thank you guys again. And if you want to briefly, Dyad, let everybody know where they can find you.
You could find me on Fridays on this awesome podcast. It's called Diet in the Force.
I thought you were just going to leave it at, you can find me on Friday.
um, Throwing back shots at your local Applebee's. I don't know. No. Yeah. Diet in the Force, come hang out with us. We hang out. We talk Star Wars, and just we have fun with the chat. We typically do have. Sometimes we have guests. Sometimes we don't. But it's chill. It's hanging out. It's all things Star Wars. We'll have a topic. We'll talk lore. We'll talk hot takes. Um, and we would be honored if you would join us.
In addition to that, pretty much after this is Yoda's Hut, which happens on Tuesdays. And if you want to join in on that discussion, I'll be debunking Literature Devil's Mary Sue video, beat for beat, word for word, point for point.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again, and thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you all back for Lost Stars in November. Bye.